love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. What are we to make of that? Were we supposed to love Osama bin Laden? Pray for Saddam Hussein? Not pray against them that they be killed or captured, but pray for them? It sounds counterintuitive and totally against our natural inclinations. I wonder, is it even possible? It's not only difficult for us to hear on this anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, but even in Jesus' own day, the words of Psalm 139 seem much more real, where they say, "With a fierce hatred, I hate them. Enemies I count as my own." I don't know about you, but I find these words of Jesus difficult to accept. Do they have any place at ground zero today? But we can't just blow them off. They come from a man who, after having nails driven through his hands and feet, after being whipped, spat upon, stripped, and mocked, he prayed, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." But then again, Jesus often used hyperbole or shocking exaggeration to get the listener's attention and make an important point. Like when he said, "If anyone comes to me without hating his father, mother, wife, children, brothers, and sisters, he cannot be my disciple," in Luke 14. Of course, the point he was making was that we need to prioritize our relationships, and a time may come when these relationships might get in the way. We've got to be ready for that. Or pluck your eye out if it offends you, in Matthew 5:29. Or if you have enough faith, you can tell a mountain to be cast into the sea and it will obey you. Can you imagine that happening? A mountain obeying anyone? Exaggeration is a common rhetorical advice even we use today. Like we might say that last Friday the Purple Dragons murdered Columbus. Or some might say, "I hope the Chiefs beat the tar out of the Buffalo Bills today." So when Jesus says to love our enemies, maybe he's trying to shock us into a square one reset of our thinking and attitude, like he often did. Instead of immediately seeking revenge, maybe he wants us to search our hearts for bitterness and hatred, then only lead to more darkness and death. Surely, he would allow us to at least defend ourselves and others who are more vulnerable. Surely, he would want us to seek justice and do our best to bring it about in our world. Can we fight and still love? Can we do battle and still pray for, not against? I think we all know that sometimes tough love is necessary. Tough love, when we hold someone accountable and perhaps even punish or sanction. The challenge is to do it with love instead of pure revenge. Can we harness our anger and its energy wisely to make a better world? About 7 years ago, I took some karate lessons. It lasted about 6 months until I injured my knee kicking thin air. Yeah. I learned a lot in that short amount of time, though. And perhaps the greatest lessons are to control your own emotions and show respect for your opponent. Since the beginning of the human race, there has always probably been conflict. In the history of Christianity, there are 2 responses. The first was that of the martyrs, a pure pacifism, later refined by Gandhi and Martin Luther King into peaceful resistance. course, both of them ended up being murdered. And how would even they respond to something like the 9/11 attacks? I wish I knew. The second response seems more practical and realistic. It's called just war theory. Sometimes we need to do more than simply love and pray. We can do as much as we can to avoid war, but if it is unavoidable, go to it as effectively and justly as possible. But let's not be in too much of a hurry to interpret these words of Jesus as an exaggeration. You remember back in 2006, Lancaster, Pennsylvania? A deranged man shot 10 Amish students, killing 5 of them and then himself. Do you remember the response of the Amish community? Forgiveness. They shocked the world. They went and comforted the parents and the widow of the shooter. They gave us all something to ponder. When we talk about enemies, there are at least 2 levels, national and personal. The national is pretty complex. We live in the greatest country in the world, and we always do well to pray for those we've elected, to analyze the situations, and make the required decisions. I personally have enough trouble trying to figure out how to cope at my own personal level. At least at that level, we have more control over our personal response. Now, as most of you know, I work in the healthcare industry, the healing industry. And who's the all-time greatest healer? You guessed it. The same guy who talks about loving your enemy, praying for your persecutors. He not only talks about it, he models it. So, is there a connection between loving and healing? Between our personal response to hostility and our ability to heal? Jesus also said that those who follow him do not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So we're talking about light, love, and healing. I invite you for a moment to reflect on your own life. With the light of Christ, enter into your own heart. Any enemies? Problematic relationships? Perhaps just wounds, hard feelings? Who doesn't have some? And we hang on to them, carry them with us, sometimes forgetting they are even there. There's some evidence that they can even unconsciously get lodged into our muscles, like knots or twitches. And sometimes we ourselves can be our own enemies. Is there anything for which you cannot forgive yourself? Anything that prevents you from fully loving yourself as God loves you? Even God lets the sun shine on the good and the bad, giving life-giving rain to the unrighteous as well as the righteous. I'm reminded of an old movie, The Mission, with Robert De Niro and Jeremy Irons. Anyone remember that one? De Niro's character captured Guarani Indians in Central America and sold them as slaves. He also found out that his brother was having an affair with his wife or fiancée, whatever she was, and killed him in a jealous rage in a sword fight. Well, he eventually repents after some time of deep despair. And he does penance by bundling up all his swords, weapons, shields, and armors, ties it to his waist, and drags that bundle with him wherever he goes. And there's no time limit set on this penance. I think Jeremy Irons is the Jesuit missionary priest who tells him that he will know for himself when the time comes when to let it go. Furthermore, De Niro is now helping Jeremy bring Christianity to the very same Indians he once enslaved. And to get to the Indian village, they have to climb a steep cliff. And there's De Niro with the huge weight tied to his waist. I think he falls a couple times because of it. Carrying it with him, dragging it around, lugging his sins, his guilt, the hatred of his past, and what he did. One of the Indians sees the slave trader with his bundle of armor and takes out his knife. De Niro thinks this Guarani is going to take his revenge and kill him, and he does nothing about it. He submits, laying there, vulnerable and broken. The Indian approaches his enemy, raises his knife in the air, ready to strike, and he cuts the rope, sending De Niro's big ball of weapons down into the waterfall. And then De Niro weeps. His healing begins. Are you carrying anything like that? Can you free someone else from their load? In another place in the gospel, Jesus tells us to forgive one another as many times as forgiveness is asked of us. But sometimes the people we have a problem with have no regret, do not ask forgiveness. What can we do? Well, we can do our own inner work, and that may take a great deal of time. Work on finding constructive resolution of our anger. Work of transforming our hatred, cutting it loose with God's grace. But how do we even start? Jesus tells us to pray for that person. We can also do good for that person. Even the Old Testament speaks to that in Proverbs 25. If your enemy is hungry, give him food. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. And in Exodus 23, if you see your enemy's ox go astray, see to it that it is returned to him. When you notice the beast of one who hates you lying prostrate under its burden, by no means desert him. Help him, rather, raise it up. And in Romans 12 tells us, bless those who persecute you. And if we ourselves are our own enemy, all the more reason. So many of us really do need to work on that, loving ourselves. Jesus tells us to be perfect. Is that another hyperbole? Another exaggeration? Setting the bar high to get our attention? Because none of us even come close. We are all in progress, incomplete, partially broken, struggling through the challenge of life, not always knowing what to do or how to do it. We all make mistakes, in spite of even the best of intentions. And still, God loves us. Maybe it's time to cut the rope. If not, more prayer is needed. take that kind of prayer seriously, reflectively. Your healing and the healing of the world may depend on it. The difference between walking in the light and walking in the darkness is in our hearts. It's the difference between death dealing revenge and healing justice. I thank you for this opportunity to come and share with you this morning. May God bless you.